Hello everyone. In today's class, we'll study the second part of the chapter called Reproduction in the Organisms. In the previous class, you have studied what is reproduction, what is lifespan, its example, types of reproduction, and phases of life cycle. Today, before I begin, I will just give a small glance of the phases of life cycle. In the phases of life cycle, there are three phases. What we call them as the juvenile phase, the first phase, second phase, the reproductive phase, and the senescence phase. If you look the juvenile phase, it is a phase where there is only somatic growth or vegetative growth of the plant or in the animal, and the organisms, they remain sexually immature and sexually inactive. If you look in the second phase called the reproductive phase, the somatic growth or the vegetative growth slows down, but there is attainment of sexual maturity and the plant or animal, they remain sexually active. If you look the last phase called senescent phase, it is the end of the reproductive phase where there is slowdown of the metabolic process and the tissues and the organs, they start to deteriorate, leading to death of the organisms. Okay, so now we will study the reproductive phase in detail. So why should we study the reproductive phase in detail? Why not the juvenile phase and senescence phase? Because this chapter is more focused upon the reproduction. We have to study the reproductive phase here. See, if you look in the reproductive phase, the small questions arises in our mind that how do we know whether the plant or the animal has attained sexual maturity? If you look the plant when they attain sexual maturity, they start to flower. This is the primary indication that tells the plant has attained sexual maturity. And what about in the animals? If you look in the animals, the gonad starts to develop, they mature, and they start to produce the gametes. Now we will study in detail about the reproductive phase in the plants. The onset of the flowering process is a primary indication of sexual maturity in the plants. And the flowering process is not same, it is not same in all the plants. It always varies among the plants. For example, if you take the hibiscus plant and the coconut plant, they start to produce the flower throughout the year. If you take the example of mango plant and the jackfruit plant, they start to produce the flower only during particular season. And there are some plants where the flower once in their lifetime. And the best example is Strobilanthus kunthiana, where they flower once in every 12 years. Okay, now we will study the reproductive phase in the animals. The gonad maturation and gamete formation is the primary indication for sexual maturity in the animals. The mammals in general and the female mammals in particular, they exhibits some cyclical changes that can be noticed in reproductive components and its associated hormones during the reproductive phase. So these cyclical changes are called as reproductive cycles. So in mammals in general, there are two types of the cycles: estrous cycle and the menstrual cycle. Estrous cycles are usually noticed among the non-primate sexually matured females. For example, they are noticed among the mice, rat, elephant, cow, tiger, deer, etc. If you look the menstrual cycles are noticed in sexually matured female primates. For example, the humans, for example, the apes. An example is okay, now we will study about the estrous cycle. See, these estrous cycle, as I told earlier, they are noticed among the non-primate sexually matured females. Example, right from the mice up to the elephant. In the estrous cycle, there are four phases: proestrus, estrus, metastrus, and diestrus. But for our understanding, we shall divide into two patterns here, or two phases here. They are called the estrus and anestrus. What is estrus and what is anestrus? If you take the estrus, it is commonly called as a period of heat. So why do we call it as the period of heat? Because the female, they become receptive for the male during this period, and there is ovulation process. And what about the anestrus? If you look the anestrus, there is no ovulation here, and here the endometrium peels off and it is reabsorbed, and the female during this phase, it does not become receptive for the males. Okay, see, based on the estrus pattern, the animals are classified into three categories here: monoestrous animal, diestrous animal, polyestrous animal. So what is a monoestrous animal? Monoestrous animal are the animals where they have only one estrous cycle per year. For example, we come across the bear, the fox, and the wolf. Diestrous animal or the animal where they have two estrous cycle in a year. Okay, for example, we come across the dog, and the polyestrous animal or the animals where they have multiple estrous cycle per year. The example is the pig, example is the cattle, the goat, horse, and the cat. Okay, so now we will study the next concept about the menstrual cycle. See, if you look the menstrual cycle, as I told earlier, they noticed in the primates. So among the primates, they noticed among sexually matured female primate. Example, the human, example, the apes, and example is a monkey. In the menstrual cycle, it is noticed throughout the year with one ovulation in a month. Okay, 1, 2, 3. The menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycles are noticed among sexually matured female primates. It is noticed throughout the year with one ovulation in a month. During the menstrual cycle, the endometrium peels off and it flows out along with the blood called the menstrual flow. After the menstrual flow stops, the ovulation is noticed, and here the female permits the copulation all the time. Okay, so from the point of the exams, there is one concept called seasonal breeders and continuous breeders. They may ask for 2 marks or for 3 marks. How do you differentiate the seasonal breeders and continuous breeders? If you look the seasonal breeders, they are noticed among the non-primate, and the continuous breeders, they are noticed among the primates. Seasonal breeders, they breed only in particular season. Continuous breeders, they breed they breed throughout the year. The seasonal breeders, they exhibit estrous cycle. The continuous breeders, they exhibit the menstrual cycle. Now, we are coming to the end of this chapter. So, the last topic in this chapter is regarding the events in the sexual reproduction. If you look in the events in sexual reproduction, there are 3 events here: pre-fertilization event, fertilization event, and post-fertilization events. The pre-fertilization events involves 2 sub-events that are referred as gametogenesis and gamete formation. In the fertilization, there are 2 types of the fertilization: external fertilization and internal fertilization. The post-fertilization involves two events here: zygote formation and embryogenesis. Embryogenesis means formation of the embryo from the zygote is called embryogenesis. So now we will study the pre-fertilization events in detail. What is pre-fertilization event? The pre-fertilization event is the event that takes place before the act of fertilization. So in the pre-fertilization events, there are two categories here. Number one, the gametogenesis, and number two, gamete transfer. Gametogenesis means what? Gametogenesis means it is a process of formation of the gametes here. What are gametes? Gametes are nothing but they are the sex cells, and the gametes can be of different types here. The male gamete also can be called as sperm or antherozoid. The female gamete can also be referred as the ovum. Isogamete. What are isogamete here? Isogamete are the gametes which resembles morphologically, they are same in terms of morphology. ಹಾಗಾದರೆ ಐಸೋಗ್ಯಾಮಿ ಅಂದರೆ ಏನು? ಗ್ಯಾಮಿ ಅಂದರೆ ಫ್ಯೂಷನ್ ಅಂತ ಅರ್ಥ. ಸೊ ದ ಫ್ಯೂಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ಸ್ ದಟ್ ಆರ್ ಮಾರ್ಫಾಲಜಿಕಲಿ ಸಿಮಿಲರ್ ಇಸ್ ಕಾಲ್ಡ್ ಐಸೋಗ್ಯಾಮಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ. ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ, ಐಸೋಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಅಂದರೆ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ದೀಸ್ ಆರ್ ದಿ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ವೇರ್ ದೇ ಆರ್ ಸೇಮ್ ಇನ್ ಟರ್ಮ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಮಾರ್ಫಾಲಜಿ, ನೋಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಸೇಮ್ ಆಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಐಸೋಗ್ಯಾಮಿ ಅಂದರೆ ಏನು? ಐಸೋಗ್ಯಾಮಿ ಅಂದರೆ ಫ್ಯೂಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ಸ್ ದಟ್ ಆರ್ ಮಾರ್ಫಾಲಜಿಕಲಿ ಸಿಮಿಲರ್. ಅನೈಸೋಗ್ಯಾಮಿ ಅಂದರೆ ದ ಟೂ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ದಟ್ ಆರ್ ಡಿಫರೆಂಟ್ ಇನ್ ಟರ್ಮ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಮಾರ್ಫಾಲಜಿ, ಅಂದರೆ ನೋಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಡಿಫರೆಂಟ್ ಆಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಹಾಗಾದರೆ ಅನೈಸೋಗ್ಯಾಮಿ ಅಂದರೆ ಏನು? ಫ್ಯೂಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ಸ್ ದಟ್ ಆರ್ ಡಿಸ್ಸಿಮಿಲರ್ ಇನ್ ಮಾರ್ಫಾಲಜಿ. ಫೈನ್. ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಅಂತ, ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಮತ್ತು ಗ್ಯಾಮಿ ಅಂತ. ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಅಂದರೆ ಏನು? ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಅಂದರೆ ದ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ವಿಚ್ ಆರ್ ಬಿಗರ್ ಇನ್ ಸೈಜ್. So usually the female gametes will be bigger than the male gamete. So the female gametes are generally they are referred as a oogamete ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ. ಹಾಗಾದರೆ oogamie ಅಂದರೆ ಏನು? The fusion of the large female gamete with the small motile male gamete is called oogamie. Okay, now we will study the next very important topic where it involves where we need to understand how does the gametogenesis takes place in the lower forms of animals. If you take in the lower forms of animals, it generally involves the example like monera, algae, fungi and bryophytes, which you have come across in the first POC. So when the plant body is applied ಆಗಿದ್ದಾಗ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಫಾರ್ಮೇಷನ್ ಟೇಕ್ಸ್ ಪ್ಲೇಸ್ ಬೈ ಮೈಟೋಸಿಸ್. ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ? ಪ್ಲ್ಯಾಂಟ್ ಬಾಡಿ ಅಪ್ಲೈಡ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದಾಗ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಹಿಂಗೆ ಫಾರ್ಮೇಷನ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಥ್ರೂ ಎ ಸೆಲ್ ಡಿವಿಷನ್ ಕಾಲ್ಡ್ ದಿ ಮೈಟೋಸಿಸ್. ಸೊ ಒನ್ಸ್ ದ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ಸ್ ಆರ್ ಪ್ರೊಡ್ಯೂಸ್ಡ್, ದಿಸ್ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ದೇ ಫ್ಯೂಸಸ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ದೇ ಪ್ರೊಡ್ಯೂಸಸ್ is diploid zygote. This diploid zygote will undergo meiotic cell division to produce a new haploid plant cell. ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ, ಲೋವರ್ ಫಾರ್ಮ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಆರ್ಗನಿಸಮ್ಸ್ ತಗೊಂಡಾಗ, ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ಮೊನಿರಾ, ಆಲ್ಗಿ, ಫಂಗೈ, ಬ್ರಯೋಫೈಟ್ಸ್, ಈ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ತಗೊಂಡಾಗ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಪ್ಲ್ಯಾಂಟ್ ಬಾಡಿ ಅಪ್ಲೈಡ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದಾಗ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಫಾರ್ಮೇಷನ್ ಹೆಂಗಾಗುತ್ತೆ? ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಫಾರ್ಮೇಷನ್ ಟೇಕ್ಸ್ ಪ್ಲೇಸ್ ಓನ್ಲಿ ಥ್ರೂ ಮೈಟೋಟಿಕ್ ಸೆಲ್ ಡಿವಿಷನ್ಸ್. After the gametes are produced, the gametes they fuses, resulting in the formation of zygote. So this zygote is diploid in nature. So this zygote undergoes meiotic cell division to produce haploid plant body. So now we'll study how gametogenesis takes place in the higher organisms. ಹಿಂಗಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ. Higher organisms ಅಂದರೆ it involves example like the pteridophytes, the gymnosperms, the angiosperms and almost all the animals. ಹೆಂಗಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟೋಜೆನಿಸಿಸ್ ಈ ಅನಿಮಲ್ಸ್ ಅಥವಾ ಈ ಹೈಯರ್ ಫಾರ್ಮ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಪ್ಲಾಂಟ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ಹೆಂಗಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂದರೆ ವೆನ್ ದ ಪ್ಲಾಂಟ್ ಬಾಡಿ ಈಸ್ ಡಿಪ್ಲಾಯ್ಡ್, ಪ್ಲಾಂಟ್ ಬಾಡಿ ಡಿಪ್ಲಾಯ್ಡ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದಾಗ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಫಾರ್ಮೇಷನ್ ಟೇಕ್ಸ್ ಪ್ಲೇಸ್ ಓನ್ಲಿ ಥ್ರೂ ದ ಮಿಯೋಟಿಕ್ ಸೆಲ್ ಡಿವಿಷನ್. ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ, ಎಂಟೈರ್ ಪ್ಲಾಂಟ್ ಬಾಡಿ ಅಥವಾ ಅನಿಮಲ್ ಬಾಡಿ ಡಿಪ್ಲಾಯ್ಡ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದಾಗ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಫಾರ್ಮೇಷನ್ ಟೇಕ್ಸ್ ಪ್ಲೇಸ್ ಥ್ರೂ ಮಿಯೋಟಿಕ್ ಸೆಲ್ ಡಿವಿಷನ್. So these gamete, when they fuses, the results in formation of a diploid zygote. The zygote that develops into an embryo only through mitotic cell division. Therefore, any cell which undergo meiotic cell division is called meiocytes. What do we call? We call meiocytes. Okay, now we'll study about the next concept. It is called the sexuality in organisms. There are around different terms which are very important for the exams. Okay, first term is called hermaphrodite. What is a hermaphrodite? Hermaphrodite means the presence of both the male and female sexual organs in the animals is called hermaphrodite. For example, they are found in the earthworm, they are found in the tapeworm and in the leech. The next term is unisexual. Unisexual means the presence of either a male reproductive organs in the animal or the presence of female reproductive organs in the animal. For example, the cockroach. In the cockroach, we can find a male cockroach and the female cockroach. The next term, homothallic conditions. Homothallic is a term which is used only in the plants to denote the bisexual conditions. Bisexual condition ಅಂದರೆ ಏನು? Bisexual condition ಅಂದರೆ presence of both the androecium and gynoecium in the same flower of a plant. The next term is called heterothallic condition. Heterothallic condition ಅಂದರೆ ಏನು? It is a term used in the plant to denote unisexual conditions. The next term is called staminate ಅಂತ. Staminate ಅಂದರೆ the flower that produces only the stamens. Stamens ಅಂದರೆ androecium. Androecium ಅಂದರೆ ಮೇಲ್ ಪಾರ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ದಿ ಫ್ಲವರ್. Pistillate ಅಥವಾ ಕಾರ್ಪಲೇಟ್ ಅಂತಲೂ ಹೇಳ್ಬೋದು. It is a condition where the flower that produces only the carpel or pistil or gynoecium. ಒಂದು ಫ್ಲವರಲ್ಲಿ gynoecium ಮಾತ್ರ ಇದ್ದರೆ the condition can be called as the pistillate or carpellate. Okay, now we'll study about the second event in the pre-fertilization process, which we call them as the gamete transfer. Gamete transfer ತಗೊಂಡಾಗ ಇದು ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಇವೆಂಟ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಪ್ರೀ ಫರ್ಟಿಲೈಸೇಷನ್ ಪ್ರೊಸೆಸ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಒಟ್ಟು ಎರಡು ಥರ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಒಂದು ಮೇಲ್ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟು ಮತ್ತೊಂದು ಫೀಮೇಲ್ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಅಂತ. ಮೇಲ್ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ನೋಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಹೆಂಗಿರುತ್ತೆ? ದ ಮೇಲ್ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಆರ್ ಸ್ಮಾಲ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ದರ್ ಮೊಟೈಲ್ ಇನ್ ನೇಚರ್. ಮೊಟೈಲ್ ಅಂದರೆ ಅದು ಮೂವ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಫೀಮೇಲ್ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಹೆಂಗಿರುತ್ತೆ? ಫೀಮೇಲ್ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಆರ್ ಲಾರ್ಜ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ನಾನ್ ಮೊಟೈಲ್ ಇನ್ ನೇಚರ್. ಓಕೆ, ಸೊ ನಾವು ಈ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಫರ್ ಹೆಂಗಾಗುತ್ತೆ? We can study the gamete transfer in two ways here. Gamete transfer in the lower forms of the animal and gamete transfer in the higher forms of animal. First, we will study about the gamete transfer in the lower forms of the animals. Lower forms andaga example is mollusca, example echinodermata, example the fishes and amphibians. Okay. ಸೊ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂದರೆ ದ ಮೇಲ್ ಫೀಮೇಲ್ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ದೇ ಆರ್ ರಿಲೀಸ್ಡ್ ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟ್ಲಿ ಇನ್ ಟು ದಿ ವಾಟರ್. ದ ಮೇಲ್ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಬೀಯಿಂಗ್ ಮೊಟೈಲ್ ಇಟ್ ರೀಚಸ್ ದ ಫೀಮೇಲ್ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ಸ್. ಓಕೆ, ಸೊ ನಾವು ವಿಲ್ ಸ್ಟಡಿ ಅಬೌಟ್ ದ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಫರ್ ಇನ್ ದಿ ಹೈಯರ್ ಫಾರ್ಮ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಅನಿಮಲ್ಸ್. ಸೊ ಹೈಯರ್ ಫಾರ್ಮ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಅನಿಮಲ್ಸ್, it involves the example like reptiles, birds and mammals here. So the male gametes, which are called as the sperms, they transferred to the female by copulatory organs through mating process. If you look in this slide, you can find there is a copulatory organ here that are involved in transferring the male gamete to the female body. So you should remember one thing here. You should know one thing. See, the number of the male gamete produced is always more, because when they move towards the female gamete, majority of them fail to reach. To compensate this, the male gamete are produced in several thousands of times. Okay, so now we'll study the gamete transfer in the plants here. So here, the gamete transfer in plants takes place through pollination process. What is a pollination? Pollination means the transfer of the pollen grain carrying the male gamete to the stigma is called pollinations. So I'm not going in a detail regarding the pollination, because in the upcoming chapters you have to study the pollination in detail. Now we will study the second event called the fertilization. Fertilization can also be called by a term called syngamy. Syngamy. Syn ಅಂದರೆ ಫ್ಯೂಸ್ ಆಗೋದು ಅಂತ ಅರ್ಥ. ಗ್ಯಾಮಿ ಅಂದರೆ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ ಅಂತ ಅರ್ಥ. ಸೊ ದ ಫ್ಯೂಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ಗ್ಯಾಮೆಟ್ is called the fertilization or syngamy. There are two types of the fertilizations here. External fertilization ಮತ್ತೊಂದು internal fertilization. External fertilization ಎಲ್ಲಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂದರೆ it takes place always outside the body. Example is the fish and the frog. Internal fertilization takes place inside the body. Example is the bird and the mammals. The third event is post-fertilization event. What is a post-fertilization event? The event that takes place after the act of fertilization is called post-fertilization events. It involves two events here. They are called zygote formation and embryogenesis. Zygote formation ತಗೊಂಡಾಗ zygote ಹೆಂಗಾಗುತ್ತೆ? Zygote is the result of the fusion of the gametes. Once the zygote is produced, they start to undergo division to give rise to an embryo. Here, the development of the zygote differs in different organisms. ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ algae ತಗೊಂಡಾಗ and fungi ತಗೊಂಡಾಗ, if you take the example of algae and fungi, zygote develop ಆಗಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ they develop a thick wall around it for the protection purpose. If you take the example of the oilworks and spirogyra, ಈ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ತಗೊಂಡಾಗ zygote undergo meiotic cell division to produce haploid spores. Gymnosperm and angiosperm example ತಗೊಂಡಾಗ zygote divide mitotically and develops into a new plant. Then what about the embryogenesis? Embryogenesis means what? The process of development of embryo from the zygote is called embryogenesis. During the embryo development, the mass of cells, they start to differentiate into specialized tissues and organs. The process of embryogenesis, it differs among different organisms. They differ in plants and they also differ in the animals. So let us study about the next concept, that means about the embryogenesis in the plant. ಹಿಂಗಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಎಂಬ್ರಿಯೋಜೆನಿಸಿಸ್ ಒಂದು ಪ್ಲ್ಯಾಂಟಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂತ. ಎಂಬ್ರಿಯೋಜೆನಿಸಿಸ್ ತಗೊಂಡಾಗ ಒಂದು ಪ್ಲ್ಯಾಂಟಲ್ಲಿ, ಎಸ್ಪೆಷಲಿ ಇನ್ ದ ಫ್ಲವರಿಂಗ್ ಪ್ಲಾಂಟ್ ತಗೊಂಡಾಗ, the embryo is formed inside the ovule of the ovary. Therefore, the embryo forms the seed, which on germination develops into a new plant, and the ovary develops into a fruit. ಅದು ಫ್ರೂಟ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅದು. ಓಕೆ, ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. If you look at the embryogenesis in the plant, in flowering plant, the embryo is formed inside the ovules of ovary. Therefore, the embryo, it forms a seed, which on germination they develop into a new plant, and the ovary develops into the fruit. If you look in terms of the embryogenesis in the animals, there are three patterns of development of embryo in the animals, which we call oviparous animals ಅಥವಾ oviparity condition, viviparous animals or viviparity condition, ovoviviparous animals or ovoviviparity conditions. We will study in a detail regarding the oviparous, viviparous and ovoviviparous conditions here. If you look the first pattern, which we call them as oviparous animals or oviparity ತಗೊಂಡಾಗ, we have to know three things here: the mode of development, process after development and examples. Mode of development ತಗೊಂಡಾಗ embryo ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, embryo develops inside the mother body in a closed hard calcareous shell. ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ, ಸಾರಿ. oviparous ಅಥವಾ oviparity condition ತಗೊಂಡಾಗ we have to study the three essentials here: the mode of development, process of development and example. Mode of development ತಗೊಂಡಾಗ embryo develops outside the mother body in a closed hard calcareous shell called the egg. ಅಂದರೆ ಒಂದು ಮೊಟ್ಟೆ ಒಳಗಡೆ ಡೆವಲಪ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಸಾರಿ, ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ ಈಗ. 1, 2, 3. Oviparous animals or oviparity condition. If you look this, we have to study in three parts here: mode of development, process after development and example. Mode of development ತಗೊಂಡಾಗ embryo develops outside the mother body in a closed calcareous shell called the egg. Process after development, develop ಆದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಹೆಂಗಾಗುತ್ತೆ? After incubation period, the young ones, they just hatch out from the eggs and they come out and they develop into a new organism. Example is the insects, example is the bird and the reptile. Second is viviparous or viviparity. Mode of development ಬಂದಾಗ embryo develops inside the mother body with the help of placenta. Process after development, development ಆದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಹಿಂಗಾಗುತ್ತೆ. After gestation period, the young ones are born by parturition. Example is a human, apes and monkey. The last one, it is called ovoviviparous animals or ovoviviparity. Mode of development ತಗೊಂಡಾಗ embryo develops inside the mother body. ಆದರೆ but the embryo, they develop in a thin shell. ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ, mode of development ತಗೊಂಡಾಗ embryo develops inside the mother body but within a thin shell. Process after development ಆದ ಕೂಡಲೇ ಹಿಂಗೆ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ, once development is complete, the young ones, they hatch from the shell and comes out of the mother. Example, the duck-billed platypus. Okay, I will just summarize the oviparous condition, viviparous condition, ovoviviparous condition. I will start with the example and the mode of development and the process after the development. Oviparous condition ತಗೊಂಡಾಗ example is insects, reptile, birds. If you take the viviparous condition, example is a human and monkey. If you take the example of the ovoviviparous condition, example is a duck-billed platypus and echidna. Mode of development ಹಿಂಗಾಗುತ್ತೆ. In the ovoviviparous, the embryo develops outside the body in a closed calcareous shell. If you take the viviparous condition, embryo develops inside the body with the help of the placenta. If you take the ovoviviparous condition, the embryo develops inside the body of the mother but within thin shell. If you come across after the process of development, hingagutte anta. Ovoviviparous, here after incubation period, the young ones, they hatch out and they comes out and they develop into a new organism. If you look the viviparous conditions, here after gestation period, the young ones are born through parturition. If you look at the ovoviviparous condition, the young ones, they hatch from the shell inside the mother body and they come out. Okay, so with this, I finished the first chapter called the reproduction in organisms. Thank you.